Hello? Hello? Yes, I think it booms. Okay. Well, whatever you can do will be very helpful. It is now 3:06 and we have quorum, so the governance meeting is called to order. I am subbing for Robin today, Miss Lady today. And in order to allow her to speak, we need to do the following. Ms. Lady has submitted a written request to attend this afternoon's meeting virtually due to a personal conflict as she is attending a conference and is attending this meeting from Los Angeles, California. All in favor of her participating? All against? None. You are allowed to participate. Next time, feel free to bribe us so we vote no. Thank you, Robin, for allowing me to stand in your place here. And we were able to have quite a number of revisions be sent out. And I tried to collate these into the document that I'm going to ask Janet to put on the screen. While she does that, I just want to offer this reminder. This grading policy is due to the full board November 1, which is approximately 1 month from today. We have 2 more meetings, the 15th and then the 29th of October. So I share this so we can be judicious about our time. I am hoping, because of all of the background work that has been done, because most of the members provided feedback, and I try to dump my feedback into the document as well, that we can go through some of these sections and determine whether or not we need to discuss them, whether or not we can just vote to move them forward as part of the potentially final document. I'm hoping we don't get caught on wordsmithing today. We can have time to do that. If the general content is where we are wanting it to go, we could wordsmith at one of the future meetings, but we will capture any notes that are provided. And I asked Mr. Jackson to do that. I know he's virtual. Mr. Jackson, are you still going to be able to do that? Okay, so will you be able to do that, Ms. Brown? Thank you. You may not see everything that your heart desired on this document that is here, but that is the conversation to be had. So, say again? Oh, okay. I don't see her hand. Oh, she's tiny. Can we move that? Okay. Robin, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I had Wendy, per my email I sent to folks, I had Wendy create an Excel spreadsheet that had different language from different versions so you could crosswalk it. So I don't know what your plan is or what you're putting in front of us, but that did just hit everyone's inbox.
Okay.
So it just has the different of verbiage and how different people edited it, if you will. So I think that would be helpful to inform the conversation today. That's why I had her do it.
I did print out what everybody sent, so I have individual copies. I just tried to collate it in a way that seemed to be where there seemed to. She just sent it.
She just sent this because she worked on it this morning because she didn't have anything until she didn't have a lot of things until this morning.
Can you share this Google form?
No, absolutely, yes, yes.
Otherwise, it'd be easier if we can all look at it on the screen.
Yep, I will share it with. Can I do that?
If you could.
No, I just want to make sure that I can share it. It's not going to be a problem. Or you could just print out a copy.
Well, that's how we did for governance. We just had the same Google Doc. As long as it was up here.
Yes,
we were
it is
able
up
to share
here.
it.
I
Yeah.
just want to make
No,
sure
what
I'm not
saying-
violating anything. I am happy to share it. I will do this right now. If we could just get started, so maybe we can find this to be useful in some way. Give me 10 seconds to share with everybody. No, not that
no,
one.
this one.
That one that is
This
up
one,
here.
that's
So
different.
give me a second.
Wendy's is a spreadsheet. This is different.
Yeah, Wendy's is a spreadsheet. Lady. Aaron. Okay, it is being sent to you all right now. Oh, I thought she wasn't. Oh, we don't have language for SEMA, so let me do that right now. We'll just use the same language. Well, I don't have the information, so can you find out? Ms. Dixit, do you have a form so we could read you into the meeting? For remote
I think it was
participation?
already done. I got a link from Denson today. I thought it was already done by Bill, probably, or maybe Christina can let us know.
Right, Christina is not here today. Ms. Brown is helping us. I just need language to read. So we'll pause while you get some language. I do not know. Oh, so I need to share it with SEMA as well. She tried. Just let me know when you've sent the document, I mean, the notice. And as we wait for that, just to further explain what I'm hoping we can accomplish today, it's literally to go down this document and to find the places where we have majority as this committee, and we could just put a check on that, and we could wordsmith at another point, but just the general content is what we're looking for. And if there are some missing components that are significant, then Janet will write those down, and then we'll make sure to include them for the next version. But we are not going to just do a collective wordsmithing today, because we know how that typically goes. So those are pretty much what I wanted to share. I'm just waiting to see the language for SEMA so we can get her read in. We can also continue. Yep, same way is fine. Okay, while we wait to do that, I'd like to ask for, and we'll have probably different kinds of time limits for the different components of this, because some are more meaty than others. Oh, there it is. Thank you. I'll just read that now. Ms. Dixit has submitted a written request to attend this afternoon's meeting virtually due to a medical conflict. In this afternoon's meeting, she's attending from Centerville, Virginia. Those in favor of approving Ms. Dixit's request? Okay, that's everybody in the room. All right, let's jump in. Let's find something easy. The title. The title has now been changed. It is Grading and Reporting Student Progress to Parents and Students and Secondary Grade Assessments and Grading and Reporting and Progress to Students. And this says this policy supersedes the next one. Who would like to have discussion on this? No, it's okay. We will have, since this is just the title,
Super quick.
we will have 90 seconds on the clock.
I just wanted to change it from grading and reporting student progress to parents and guardians to parents, guardians, caregivers, and students, because it's also for students to see their own grades. I felt like that was missing.
Absolutely.
So,
And you've taken that note? I'm sorry, is it Wendy who's copying and somebody else is timing? Who's doing the timing? I'm sorry, please repeat? Okay, Ms. Brown is timing. Wendy, are you taking notes? I'm taking my notes. Okay, so did you capture the notes that were just shared by Ms. Marin in order, no, by Ms. Sizemore Heiser, in order to ensure that we have students and guardian and caregivers be involved?
I have one more on that title, too.
Okay.
So the other one is just, I don't know what's progress of learning, because I think there's grading on lots. So I would just say secondary grades assessment and grading, assessment and grading and reporting. I would take off the on progress of learning.
Okay. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay. And can we see the timer here? Is that possible?
Not in here, no.
Okay, but your timing? Okay.
Been able to see the timer before.
I know, but
Why there and there before, and then we can't see
okay, we will make do, but can we make a note so that the timer can be available while it's visible to everyone? Because it does help us figure out our comments. Ms. Marin, 90 seconds.
Yeah, I think that the title, it's important to focus on two things. Are we talking about grading and reporting or just grading? I'd like to relegate conversations about parents, guardians, and that kind of thing to the purpose. Because right now, the issue that we all discussed previously was the location of this policy lives in special services. So really, we want to actually go the line up, right? And do we agree that it should be in instructional services, which you do have in your draft, Dr. Anderson, and then it's grading and reporting. Again, there's two differences between the grading and the reporting. Those are two different things. And so I think we should discuss whether this policy is going to include both of those things. I know in the version that I put forward, I had put it as, I think, let me just check here, informal reporting. So what's currently in the policy talks about informal and formal reporting. The version I put forth kept that in there, but I also wanted us to discuss it. Dr. Anderson, or I don't know, the versions.
Fair.
Yeah, so I think Ms. Lady did not put it in there, so I think that a point for discussion.
I put it in there.
I think a point for discussion should be, do we agree about moving it to instructional services? And does the title include grading and reporting or just grading? I think that's the bulk of the conversation. But that bulk of it is going to need more discussion about bigger things down below.
Okay, so if I can ask, can we, and I see your hand, Robin, so go ahead, 90 seconds for Ms. Lady.
I left grading and reporting in. I have formative and formal and informal in my revision too.
Thank you, Ms. Lady. Ms. Dixit, are you wanting to speak on this topic?
No, I'm good for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I will say, since there seems to be a lot of conversation that may come out of this, let's walk through the body of the document, and maybe it will become clearer to us. So we will put a pause on the title and where it lives for current, for this current piece. So we're going to go to part one, which is purpose. Can you please raise that up and make it as big as possible on the screen?
I had one more thing on the top, unrelated to the title, but the instructional services piece, which we didn't talk about.
We'll circle back to all of that once we kind of go through some of the others. I think it might reveal
It's a
itself.
different point, but.
Okay, well,
related to that. I'll
if
add
you
it to the
could just.
purpose. I can tell, yeah.
Thank you. If you could put purpose up. This is a combination of the feedback that was received. I believe both Ms. Marin and Ms. Sizemore-Heiser had written comments to this. Please take a look at it. Who would like to have discussions on purpose? Ms. Lady.
I'm comfortable with what's written.
Thank you. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Just,
90 seconds, please.
I'll just jump back to the instructional services. My concern about listing as instructional services versus chief academic officer is that the Department of Special Services is not under instructional services. And traditionally in the past, the Department of Special Services was even moved out of the academic officer into a whole different department. So if we have this under instructional services, we need to make it clear that it also applies to students who are receiving special education services. So I would recommend, unless there's a way to put under academic office instead of instructional services, because still, things seem still very siloed between the two. So that's my only concern about listing instructional services, is that I want to leave out all the special education students who seem to be primarily getting their attention from special services. So I would recommend saying, if there's an academic title, I don't know if there is or not, or making it clear that instructional services and Department of Special Services, or some sort of clear indicator that we're not leaving out that chunk of students.
Thank you. Do you have comments regarding the purpose wording?
Yeah, I think it's good with the different changes that we had towards growth and achievement. So I think I'm good with it.
Okay, seeing no other speaker, Miss Lady, is your hand up for that? Or was that from before?
It was from before, I'm good.
Thank you. Ms. Marin, did you have your hand up?
No, and I think Ms. Sizemore-Heiser raises a really good point. I mean, I do wonder then, should it be in special services? Because that seems to be more inclusive, but at the same time, it's not very clear that it's inclusive of all of our gen ed students. So I think perhaps we need to hear from staff about where not only this one, but there were other policies as well that were listed in instructional services, I think, unless we're folding them in.
Sure. Can I just ask for you to hold for just 1 second? Because I feel like we're really close to the purpose being completed, and then we'll circle back to that. I don't have any additional comments with the purpose. So I think we might want to wordsmith and make it prettier later on, but the content, who can be amenable to the content? Show your hands, please. If you are amenable to the content of the purpose. Oh, did you have purpose comments? Oh, go, purpose
I have
comments.
purpose. Well, the purpose talks about grading and reporting. So here again, we're coming back to that question of, is this policy about grading and reporting or just grading? So I'm fine with it, but if we can just keep as an asterisk to come back to that.
Okay. More purpose?
I don't know if you're trying to, say, remove the reporting or just make sure that we're being consistent with it throughout, but there are other places that talks about reporting in here.
Yeah.
So we just have that mindset, I think is what I'm hearing you say, but I wanted to clarify. Okay, thanks.
I will take a turn. I wasn't planning on taking a turn, but I will very quickly. I think we'll be hard pressed to separate the grading and reporting. They're two conversations that go hand in hand. So I think we should be comfortable with these things will be going hand in hand throughout this policy. That's just kind of my 2 cents. Seeing no other hands, I am going to ask for consensus around the purpose. Who is fairly comfortable with this as a general content? We might make it pretty later on. All right, I see 1, 2, 3, 4. Yay, purpose. Let's go back to the question to Dr. Presidio. I think you were going to speak about the biggest umbrella that could capture the most kids in terms of the titling.
Well, I mean, I think we can make whatever work, whatever makes sense to you. But I mean, obviously, there's 3 departments under the chief academic office. There's not a chief academic department, right? There's three departments: special services and instructional services, and then assessment and reporting. This used to be, grading used to be with special services many, many years ago when counseling was aligned with special services. That predates me even being in the organization. So counseling is in instructional services now. So if we were going to be consistent with how things should be organized, it would go under instructional services. It can go anywhere. It doesn't necessarily make a difference. I don't know that there's a way to title the policies by chief office as opposed to department. But I mean, we'll make it work no matter how we put it together.
I'm sorry, what did you say was the third piece? You said there's special services, instructional services, and
And then assessment and reporting.
assessment? Okay.
Well, it could. That's largely our testing. They don't,
Yeah.
I mean, that's largely our testing and data department. They don't provide any support around grading practices.
Okay, thank you. 90 seconds for comments regarding what was said. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
Well, then I think if counseling is under instruction, it probably makes sense to have it here. However, I would suggest we make it explicit in the policy that this covers all students regardless of whether they're this policy covers all students. I added some language specifically to IEPs and 504s later in the policy, but I would say somewhere in here, and I can look through and see if it's a good spot, we just make it explicit, because I know the siloed mentality we've had here. I don't want to keep that and have someone say this is only for instruction and special services can have different grading. So I'll look for a place maybe to make that explicit. Is that okay with you all to explicitly state this policy?
We'll just have people speak to it when it's their turn, because I see a couple of hands. Ms. Lady, you were next. 90 seconds, please.
Yeah, I don't know any educator who would think that every child is not included under this policy. I mean, we do assessment, grading, and we do reporting back to parents. nowhere would anyone think that this did not include 504 IEP, multi-language learners, you name it. So I'm, I don't see at all where this conversation, I understand the sensitivity, from Ms. Sizemore Heiser, but just from an educator's lens, I don't think anybody would look at this and not know, and believe that it applies to all students who walk into a classroom and are learning and therefore need feedback on their learning.
Thank you, Ms. Marin.
You done, Ms. Lady?
Oh, so sorry.
Yeah, my only other comment was that I believe it belongs in instruction.
Well, I think, I'm starting like one of those parking lot lists where this could be a conversation we bring back to the full board, and we've already talked as a committee about how we want to update our numbering of the policies and make sure everything's organized, and indeed, we have a different leadership team structure now. So this could be a much bigger can of worms. So I agree with Ms. Eismer-Heiser's thinking, though, and how to make this really clear, given that we do have these silos. So, I would say let's leave it in instruction for now, but when we present it to the board, say, but this is our, question to you all, and maybe it's going to take some more work from staff and us to align all the numbers. So, and I am okay with the grading and reporting as long as the reporting part is fleshed out further down. So I think we got some agreement.
Thank you. I'll take a quick turn. I agree with what Ms. Lady has said. I think all of our educators believe that this is applicable to all of our students, and I think we could also say it. It could be as simple as that last sentence under purpose. This is to the reporting of such learning by FCPS students, by FCPS to all students. It could be as simple as one word. So that's my time. Now, just to back out a little bit, would we be able to meet what we think we're all trying to get at by just the addition of the word all? Are we in agreement to that? I see an agreement to that, so purpose has been improved and
I agree.
Oh, all will go, well, just looking at it at first blush here, the first paragraph, last bit that says, this is to establish policy on the reporting of such learning by FCPS teachers to all students, parents, and caregivers, and other FCPS staff.
Instead of the all being on the reporting, can we say assessing and grading all secondary student progress? So the first sentence, to establish policy for assessing and grading all secondary student process. So the whole idea is this policy is for all students as opposed to it being reported to all students. So just moving the all to a different spot.
Let's just stick a pin on the wordsmithing, and maybe behind the scenes, we could do
It's not
that.
wordsmithing, Dr. Anderson, it's actually changing the meaning of it. So,
Yeah, I like the new location.
yeah, it's not about reporting it to all students, it's using this to assess all students. So I really think.
Oh, of all secondary, oh, I'm so
Yes,
that's
That's what I did.
Okay,
Assessing and grading all secondary student progress.
Perfect.
That's where I wanted to put it. And so I just wanted, if it wasn't clear, I do want to leave this instruction. I just needed to make it clear in the policy that applies to all students. Because I've had educators tell me directly to my face that my son was not supposed to learn any curriculum. So I think we have different experiences, and we just
oh,
need
I'm
to-
certainly,
Yeah, so.
there's a lot of experiences. Are we all in agreement with moving all to the first part of that first paragraph? Okay, looks like we have agreement. Moving on. Purpose is achieved. Again, for the second time. Okay, summary of changes. I'm hoping we don't spend a lot of time here because we know this will need to be fleshed out because there will be a lot of changes. This is more of a placeholder, and we just need to continue to feed that as we go through the document, which I'm sure staff is going to be very diligent in reviewing. So without objection, I am not going to have any discussions on summary of changes. Okay. Philosophy, this is a big one, so we will take probably a couple of minutes to have these discussions. What is here is reflective of feedback by the folks who have sent that feedback, and I added my own. So please take a look to see that new language, and then we will just start the conversations. And again, if we could just keep from wordsmithing and just talk about content. I'm looking for, okay, no. Are there any hands? We'll just take a couple minutes more to review. Oh, I think they're reading here, but I will share this with you, Dr. Presidio, and Dr. Reed, just so you can see it as well. Apologies. And Dr. Edie, I will add you to this as well. Give me 1 second, Colleen. Okay, we will start with 2 minutes, and we will start with Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
I just want to say, one of the changes I sent is not reflected in this document. 'Cause under achievement-based grading, what I had sent was relevant to course content, learning objectives, curriculum requirements, and portrait of our graduate skills. Now, I'm not saying that the same, so just to hear me out, I'm not saying the same grade could reflect all of those. You could have different reporting structures, but if we're going to have portrait of a graduate, I do think we need to somehow assess those skills, whether it's separate like they do in the elementary school reporting cards. Otherwise, there's some very important skills, executive functioning skills, that we're just not giving any students or parents ideas on how they meet them. So I think it is important to have grading, whether we're looking at content grading and then separate grading for other skills. I think it's important to name that we want to have that in here. So that's what I had added that in my document that I sent originally. That if you don't mind, Dr. Anson, I'm just going to add it onto here so it's reflective of, I guess I don't have edit access, so I can't do that.
Ms. Brown,
That's your document you sent, so you have to do it.
let's go ahead and finish hearing from everybody.
Well, I think it should.
No, I hear you, she's going to do it.
Okay.
But let's keep the conversation going. Miss Lady, I think that's your hand.
Was my turn up?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you
I
were.
was, yeah, so that's the first thing I wanted to mention is, on that piece, I do think it's also important, I want to make sure this is here also. And so similarly, I think it's important to communicate clearly on learning, skill development, and social emotional growth. So that, I was trying to tie those two together, that we have clear communication on those, but I just wanted to make sure it's not that it's the same number. So it's not like your executive functioning skills are reflected in your A or B, but it's a different number. So that's the main point I wanted to make. But I will say, as someone who teaches college classes, those are definitely the skills that the students lack more than anything else. So it's important as they're going through our system for them to have a sense of where they're at.
Miss Lady, go ahead.
Yeah, so while I agree, I do agree with Ms. Sizemore-Heiser that it would be nice to get some sort of feedback to parents on POG skills. And I understand that what we have available to us in a grade book should not maybe prohibit us from looking at that, but I think we have to be realistic about contracts we've signed and whether or not we can put something in a policy that can't be operationalized. My other concern is the reference to transitions. I mean, it's under academic achievement-based grading, and the opening statement is grading should be based on student achievement, knowledge, and proficiency. That has nothing to do with transitions from elementary to middle and middle to high. I 100% agree, and we've talked about this sort of in different, conversations about the importance of our transition programs, but I don't believe that that belongs anywhere in a grading policy because you don't grade a transition. And again, while I'm comfortable with pointing out specifically, I think it should be MLL, even, I mean, because we're going by multi-language learners at this point, not EO. But to be honest, I don't necessarily know that we need to differentiate that, but I understand the sensitivity to differentiating that, so I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with, we can't grade a transition. And then further down, under communication of grading, I could not see what you have. Can you show me communication of grading on the screen?
Did I not share this with you? Are you not oh, you only have one screen.
I don't, I'm just looking at your screen. Yeah, we can't grade social emotional learning. And the same. I mean, if we're going to give feedback on skill development, that's different, but we cannot grade or assess social emotional learning and skill development. Like that's grading behaviors and that's grading emotion. So when I understand the sentiment, but I feel like we're getting outside the guardrails of what grading policy and grading and reporting policy needs to indicate. So I'm uncomfortable with the addition of skill development and social emotional learning there because those are things we can't grade.
Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Lady. Ms. Marin?
So I think the definition section needs to come before philosophy because we're using terms in philosophy that aren't defined until the following section. So that's one point. And I know this is not in the category of wordsmithing, but it is, I want to make the point about being consistent in our use of vernacular. So like right at the first sentence, it says assessment and grading. And that's what made me think, well, the definition section needs to be first because assessment is different than grading. And I also see in this one paragraph, I think, or maybe it was soon after the reporting. And so again, like I just want to be clear on the grading is one thing and the reporting is another. So, and I didn't at this quick blush figure out where that exactly lines up. I did insert here, when I was doing my own notes, what the grading committee had put in as its practices. And I'm not sure that all of those translated in, and maybe that's okay, it might be, but I don't see consistency as one of the factors, and that is one of our main goals. So promoting consistency in grading across teams, departments, and schools, that came from the grading report. So again, even in these, the philosophy, it's the philosophy of grading. And so we should then steer clear of the reporting piece. Again, I'm not saying it's entirely in here, but I just need to keep reiterating it for my own understanding. And I do think that we have on our committee here a different viewpoints in whether grading should include the academic content and the skills in comparison to behaviors, but that sort of portrait of a graduate, like I think I hear a difference of opinion. And so I think we're not going to resolve that today. And so I wonder if that's one of those things that we come to the full board with and we could each articulate what we think that is. Because for me, if a student cannot have a high executive functioning, that student will not be effective in whatever that student learns. So is that really a behavior or that's a skill that's needed to succeed? And do we want to get in the weeds of that, or are we, what are we directing to the superintendent? So, and again, the clear communication of grading, that is important, but that's some about reporting, I don't know, it's a lot of words, and I guess that's my feedback for now.
Thank you. Ms. Dixit?
So I'm coming from the industry perspective here, and I do know that you can have the best of grades, but if you cannot work as a team player, have that emotional, piece, emotional quotient, EQ more than IQ, that's what you need to survive in the workplace and be a leader, effective leader. So I totally want to incorporate that in our grading in some ways, if not a direct grade, but a indirect assessment, that a student is really going as per a portrait of graduate, all the different factors, and having some measure of that. Are they effective communicator, collaborators? And I'm telling you, the more and more we are going to use AIs, and a lot of these, gradings will not be a topic in the future. It's going to be the EQ, and again, the more of how are you working with others. So I do feel that we have a great model of portrait of the graduate, and we need to incorporate that in our grading policy. It's just not the A's and the B's and for the core curriculum.
Thank you. I will take my turn. It's 2 minutes. Quick question, Dr. Presidio. on the elementary report card, where there's a work ethic component that talks about being a good listener, being consistent about work habits, et cetera, how would that work? How can we duplicate that for a secondary report card?
I mean, I think that's a great question. One thing I would say is I would want to get teacher feedback on that before we would do anything, because there are workload implications with asking teachers to assess on, different factors like, work habits. I think there's a couple different ways you could do it, though. We have the comment sections in those report cards now at the secondary level. I don't think those work as well as they could because they're basically drafted. They're not authentic and they don't really make sense. I mean, like with my own kids, I look at them and it's like, this isn't really adding any value. So we could either come up with a better set of pre-populated responses in particular categories that we would ask teachers to use, or we could open that up and have it be more of a free type of responsibility for teachers to type in the information that they wanted. So you could do that through the comments section. Or if there were a particular set of skills that the board wanted teachers to assess, we would define those more similarly, I guess, to the elementary level. And then teachers could obviously, assess based on those predetermined categories. So it just depends how tight you want it or how loose we would want it. But I do think getting principal and teacher feedback on that would be important.
Thank you. I am definitely of the mindset of the position, and I've said this to you and probably to others before we started this work, that we should have two categories, because we've been very clear here that we are assessing content knowledge, and that's what that grade is. It's to reflect content knowledge. Having said that, there are other things that we do need to give some information about because it impacts the attainment of the content. I don't want to get down the road of the portrait of the graduate skills specifically, like how good of a collaborator is, little Sloan, using Dr. Boyd's vernacular. I don't think that's it, but I think there needs to be something. So I am uncomfortable with listing the portrait of the graduate skills, but there has to be something that speaks to those other skills that we know impact content knowledge or content attainment. So that's where I would like to see us fall. And that would also mean that we do something differently in the actual document. But I don't want us to be limited here in our conversation that we cannot change the document, that drop-down menu, because it's entirely unhelpful at that secondary level that no matter what the grade is, works consistently. Well, I don't know what that means. But I do also want to make sure that I do realize, because I've been in that seat, that if we were to go to the route of laying out the portrait of graduate skills components as a grade, that might even be difficult for some of our teachers who don't know our kids because they have 150 of them. So I want to be realistic about what exactly can be happening and how they can assess that. Thank you. Go backs, I see, well, I'm just going to go down the list as we had it. Ms. Eismore-Heiser.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation. I guess the first question I'd ask is, I think I heard questions about whether portrait of graduate skills can be operationalized in grading. So Dr. Reed, I'm going to ask you that question since it's operational. Do you believe that you can find a way to operationalize the assessment? I'm not necessarily saying within the A grade, like I think the two categories make some sense, but can you operationalize the assessment of the portrait of graduate skills, or do you prefer to have it be more broad? Do you think that's operationalizable?
I can't hear her.
Try this one.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't know. I would have to, I think this, if I saw the title said secondary grading and reporting, it didn't talk about elementary. So in the secondary grading world, I don't think you can operationalize it in a traditional grading structure and scale. I think it's operational in a variety of non-traditional grading methods, such as a mastery transcript, but in a traditional division-wide systemic grading scale, I think it would be difficult to operationalize as a separate grade. And I think you could take the portrait of a graduate skills and have them integrated into the work you do in a classroom, so you're sort of by extension, assessing them in grading scales, but if we're talking about like on an elementary report card, where you kind of have study skills sometimes on the side, or I guess it's often study skills, right? I think it's easier to do that on the side. I don't know, unless the team here has integrated Portrait of a Graduate grading into some type of format for our current grading structure. I haven't seen that here yet, but it's possible I just
So I'm
haven't
not asking for
noticed
the
it.
current grading structure, I'm asking if it can be operationalized, right? Because if we're changing the policy, that may change the current grading structure. So that's my question, and if it can't, then what's the point of having it, if you can't assess it?
Well, I think that's a great question, right? Like you'd have to act, let me think about that. You'd have to actually have some kind of skill set that you assessed for those attributes. And I'm just trying to think, like in an AP Chem class, I suppose you could identify collaborating and critical thinking. I don't know what the intent of Portrait of a Graduate was to be down the road,
I
other
guess
than,
I asked that question.
identify it. I don't know that I've seen it in a grading practice here.
Maybe share just very briefly some of the current ways that we're assessing those skills, and Colleen's team really leads a lot of that work. Just, even 60 seconds on that might be helpful.
Let me just ask one follow-up question, then absolutely, I'd love to hear that. But I guess the question I have, Dr. Reed, is then, if we're saying in our policy that we're not looking at behavior in grading, then I would say that teachers can't assess Portrait of a Graduate or other study skills as part of grading, because we're saying you can't look at behavior for grading. So it seems like if we're changing our grading policy to specifically say that, and it's just mastery of content, then it says that we are changing our traditional grading, because our traditional grading is maybe based on turning things in on time and those Portrait of a Graduate skills. So if we are going to say none of that counts, it's no behavior counts, then we're essentially changing our grading practices to saying skills don't matter at all. And I'm uncomfortable not having some sort of assessment of skills. So that's like if it's just retakes as much as you want, reassessments as much as you want, all the things, then those skills aren't being part of the grades, which I understand the philosophy behind it, but I'm trying to get some, whether it's Portrait of a Graduate specifically or some other skills, how are we even looking at assessing those if we're changing our traditional grading to not have those as part of grading? Because that's what I'm hearing is standards-based grading is changing traditional grading. So if we're changing traditional grading to get rid of skills, how do we assess them or do we not? Do we not care? That's the question.
Brown, are you still timing for us? Okay.
She is.
Just a few things real fast, then I want to ask Colleen to come in. I think you're asking some good questions and obviously bringing up some good points. I think some of the examples that you were talking about are more things like work habit, right? Like turning things in on time, which is different than the types of things that we're talking about. Well, that's what I thought I heard. So let me just finish my point. Okay.
If
So
we
let me
could,
just-
if you could hold on one second, can you ensure that everybody understands what is it that you are saying, so that when they give us these examples, we're actually talking about the same things?
I'm saying that how well you know math or any academic content is a skill, but in standards-based grading, we're not letting other skills that are just as important, in my opinion, to being successful in college and career as part of that grade. However, if we're taking away any assessment of those other skills, then we devalue the development of those skills, and therefore we're setting our students up for failure. That's what I'm saying. So how do we assess those skills so we'll make sure they're taught? Because we're taking away the incentive to have them being done.
Right, and I think that's a good point. So the point I was trying to make is that I think there are a subset of skills that are more work habit type of skills, right? Like I turn things in on time, I'm organized, right? And then there's the Portrait of a Graduate attributes that are, broader, right? They're not as specific or they're more nuanced, right? I'm an effective collaborator or communicator. That's harder to assess in some situations than do you turn things in on time, right? So I think there's a place for both of those things, and I think in the new grading policy, as we were mentioning earlier, there's different ways you could get at some of those things. We could do something different with the comment section on report cards. We could come up with a different section where students were rated on the particular habits that we wanted to rate. But the Portrait of a Graduate attribute work is a little bit different And it really is meant to be more authentic in terms of the student's sense of the attributes that they are developing, right? Like, how effective am I at increasing my collaboration skills, right? So we do a lot of reflection work with students and get feedback from teachers and peers. So maybe just a few seconds if you want to talk about some of the things we're doing with Portrait of a Graduate.
So Dr. Presidio is right that our Portrait of a Graduate program focuses on students being able to set goals related to Portrait of a Graduate attributes and skills in ways that are developmentally appropriate, and then to look for evidence in their own learning experiences and kind of collect evidence over time of how they're developing in those skills. And to do some self-assessment and share with their peers, with their families, with their educators, how they're growing along the way. So that's one part of Portrait of a Graduate, which is like, I know it, I know my own growth, I know my own goals, and I'm able to share that with others. The other part I wanted to emphasize is that in curriculum, and across the content areas in secondary curriculum, most content areas emphasize process-oriented skills, disciplinary skills that are embedded in the standards and are assessed as part of the curriculum. So, for example, the development of argument and, working on not only crafting an argument, but having relevant evidence from reliable sources, or analyzing primary and secondary sources, things that are skills. They're not only knowledge, but they're disciplinary skills. Those are not only part of our curriculum here, but they're actually embedded in the state standards. So we have come a long way over time in terms of what our students are asked to know and be able to do. It really isn't just about factual information, it really is about the development of disciplinary skills. Helping students to see those things in ways that are more aggregate, like as I'm developing in this way in science and in social studies and language arts and mathematics, they lead to these broader sets of Portrait of a Graduate skills that are transferable across content areas. That's the work of the Portrait of a Graduate reflection, to be able to say, when I was doing this in my social studies class, I was actually learning to be a global and ethical citizen, which I'd like to, apply in other contexts. So we assess those things, we grade on those things, and those grades are reported.
So just to oversimplify it, the way I think about it, you don't have to think about it this way. There's the content-specific learning standards and skills. There's the work habits, and then there's the developmental Portrait of a Graduate attributes, right, that are growing and changing over time. I would not personally want to try to put the Portrait of a Graduate attributes into a report card. I think there are other ways that we need to report on that progress, and we have some of those systems built in place now. Not every school is doing it consistently, so that's a growth area, but we have some good ways, I think, to measure Portrait of a Graduate. We don't have great ways right now to measure those, I guess for lack of a better word, work habits, right, other than what we've got on the report card with the comments section that I don't think works very well right now. But that's just my opinion.
How much more time is left of Ms. Sizemore's time?
I have just a little bit to add. I know you asked that. I think one of the questions that you're raising is in general, and this goes back to the conversation around 70-30, 60-40, 80-20, et cetera, and that distinction between summative and formative assessments. And I think the Portrait of a Graduate skills are more likely situated in the formative, which would be currently in that 30%. So I think that because those projects are the sort of more formative labs, formative type things would probably lend themselves more towards the Portrait of a Graduate skills, I would think, than the summative.
Well, I'll probably need to go back, but I think if you're assessing Portrait of Graduate skills, we need some way to report that assessment.
Okay.
And I do think we need to have work skills somewhere in here.
We'll put you on the go back. Miss Lady?
Yeah, I want to thank Dr. Presidio and Colleen and Dr. Reed for your comments. I mean, when we introduced POG, it's part of lesson planning and design, right? So it's in turn a part of assessment and grading, and such that if we've created, a group project, there's group work involved. The way that's layered, whatever kind of rubric that's created to grade that, and when a parent goes into a grade book and they can see how things are named, I think you see those things. And I think that just like elevating the process skills that are being taught, I mean, there was a time when we weren't asking kids to be able to read and analyze primary and secondary sources. I think that back to Dr. Presidio's point, well, I could walk in a classroom at Chantilly and I could see on the whiteboard the pod goal or goals of the day, right? And then whatever their objectives were, like the teachers who had that much of an organizational structure around their lesson planning, design, and implementation and delivery, it was tight. It was fantastic. I mean, kids were absolutely aware of what they were doing. Just like anything we do in education, it's sort of like the early adopters and then the sustainability of things. And then it's like something new comes in and does this get pushed out, right? So, I think that that's a piece of this. And I do agree. I think it's being assessed, I mean, I certainly know as a parent, and when my kids were at Marshall, if I broke down what was happening with their grade book and their grades, if it was a database, if they were doing something in an IB history course, for example, and they had to create an argument to support it, then I see those skills being developed. So I just want to put that out there because I do believe it's being done well. And I believe that when you see a grade, that it's embedded within the grade. But is it set apart? No. But just keep in mind what those goals are. It's communicator, collaborator, ethical global citizen, creative and critical thinker, and goal-directed and resilient. I mean, those are kind of hard in a vacuum to give a grade to.
Thank you, Miss Lady. That was your time.
Okay.
Miss Marin?
So this is very interesting. I mean, I really would like the whole board and the public and everyone to hear it explained as you explained it. Because I have been struggling, like my colleagues have, with figuring out, well, what's the content, what's the skill? We know that if you have the skill, you'll get the content, and also the term mastery. I know on the last board, that was something that the majority didn't really favor using, and I think of, students with disabilities, are they able to master certain things? No, but are they at the best of their ability, the top of their ability? Have they been, so do we want to use that term mastery? That's a question that I have. When I look at this philosophy section, I think a lot's been added to it, and I'm thinking back to our purpose is to set the direction. So we've talked through a bunch of things, but what do we need to put in here that would direct the superintendent to create the grading practice as we're envisioning it? So I also think, again, with vernacular, there's some things here that say grading should be this or that. We got to nix those shoulds. It's either it is or it isn't, because we know how that plays out in practice. And again, just this constant switching out of assessment and grading. I would rather have really succinct bullets and fewer. I think there's too much going on in here right now in the philosophy. And when I look down and see the definitions, I kind of need to absorb that as well. But I do think that this philosophy section is really at the heart of what I've heard us wanting to talk about. Like, if we're going to spend time on a section, I think this is it. I do also think we maybe should move on for a little bit and come back to it, because there are things in there such as, there's a reference to elementary school grading. Well, that's an open question now. So I think overall, well, my bigger question too is, do we want to actually name Portrait of a Graduate and name the current strategic plan, knowing that, of course, this policy will be reviewed in the next 5 years as it is supposed to be? So that is a question that I offer.
Thank you, Ms. Mann. Ms. Dixit?
Thank you. So I am actually reading this, saying grading practices must be responsive to individual student learning needs. So where are we doing it if we're just going to master them on the one scale, like basically a standard kind of a set of rules? How are we giving opportunities to individualize groups? And I will say from experience that I had a very advanced learner, but then he was treated pretty much the same like everybody else in the class, in his classroom. He could have done the same class in 6 months, but he had to stay for the entire year because he was that was the way things are. So if we're talking about individualized grading, and how are we supporting all students if you're just going to say this is the grade book and we are going to give them the grade according to this set of rules or set of questions? That's my first question.
Dr. Presidio, Dr. Reed?
I apologize. I'm not sure I fully understand that question. Would you mind rephrasing it for me?
So my question is that we are saying we are trying to do individualized student learning needs, support them. But in practice, if we're going to have the same grading policy for all students, then how are we making it individualized then? It kind of, it doesn't it doesn't work together. Either we do individualized grading or we do a common set of grading for all students.
I think the intent.
I don't know.
And again,
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't draft what we have on here, but we
Right,
did have
right.
we did have something similar from the grading committee, and the intent was really to talk about how we're going to support students that have individualized needs, right? So it's not that we're going to have a different grading system for some students. To Ms. Heiser's point earlier, we're going to have one grading system, but we're going to provide the scaffolds and the supports that students need to be able to be successful using the same grading scale and the same grading practices across the division.
So if that is the case, so I'll just give you an example. If a student could master pre-calculus in 6 months' time, it doesn't have to go to the entire year to finish those classes. Can they then move to calculus in the same grade? And just because they were mastered the skills in 6 months?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question because that's introducing a whole nother set about individualizing the instruction to students as well, right? So if they're able to work faster than other students in the class, and how we would support them with that. Primarily, right now, we have students that are learning above grade level in our elementary classrooms, and then when you get to the secondary level, you're learning new content. So typically, we wouldn't see that happen as frequently at the secondary level as we might at the elementary level, but we do accelerate students that need that acceleration based on their ability to go through the curriculum faster in certain instances.
But I've not seen anybody skipping like done 2 courses in a year. They can do like advanced courses, so I get that. My son did a virtual Virginia because he was able to get into pre-calculus over the summer. In the summer he finished pre-calculus. So in 9th grade, then he went to calculus, AP calculus, or whatever the next class was.
Right.
The question was that because he could do it, and the virtual Virginia grade were acceptable to FCPS, but he had to do it outside of the school to do it.
Ms.
If he had come
Dixon,
to-
we'll have Dr. Presidio respond to your question, but your time was up just a little while ago.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Dr.
Yeah,
Presidio, can you answer?
I mean, I see your point. We really don't have an opportunity for students to test out of content that they haven't already completed in most instances, right? In world languages, for example, we do have that ability for students to test in at the particular level that they might need to be placed at, so they can accelerate based on their background experiences. But we don't have that in all of our content areas, but we do have the ability for students to, and again, this is like the general rule, because there are the exceptions. I mean, we do have some elementary students, a handful of students that are in pre-calculus or calculus classes at the elementary level. So that is possible, but those are the exceptions. As a general rule, we're going to accelerate the students when we can do that at the elementary level by keeping them in their same grade level, but by giving them advanced grade level content. At the secondary level, if they haven't already completed the course, then they do need to complete that course content before they move on. We don't have opportunities for students to test out really at the secondary level right now.
Thank you, Dr. Presidio. I'm going to go ahead and take my turn, so if you wouldn't mind putting in the 2 minutes. This philosophy section has the preamble, which I think I've spent most of my time talking about here, and then it has the 6 bullets. The 6 bullets are primarily the guiding principles from the report. That has not changed much, but I know there have been a few suggestions that may have fleshed them out a little bit. So I would recommend just maybe parsing that out just from a just from a facilitator's perspective. But in terms of the content, I'm very grateful to what you said, Dr. Edie, because I do not see a component where an instructor could have a list that says portrait of a graduate goals and be able to assess that, and every instructor is assessing that as a finite number. It can't be that binary because it is so embedded into everything that is done. So I agree with you on that. And I would like us to beef up the part of the report card that provides more information to parents, whether it's more comments, a better drop down, and mandating that they are used, because very often they're left blank, or it's just another section altogether. I don't want us to be hamstrung by what exists currently to not be able to innovate and think in the future. But the portrait of the graduate skills, I don't think lives here. I think the preamble has been broad enough. It needs a little work, but I think it's broad enough to kind of capture the conversation in the room, which is how do we offer feedback on some of those other skills? So that's what I'd like to have happen. I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to yield the rest of my time, and I will take Ms. Marin's guidance, which is, there's a lot here for us to unpack, so maybe we pause and we come back to this, and we work with another component that may be a little bit easier for us to get consensus on today, like the definitions. But I'm hoping we could find that space where we can have the dual reporting. It doesn't have to be as extensive as the elementary, because if I recall correctly, and I'm going to pull one of my kids' old report cards, it has at least 9 different components, and they're rating them from 1 to 4. It doesn't have to be that, because the secondary report card does not lend itself to be that, but it has to be more than what we have currently. It is very insufficient, because I don't know who my learner is if I just see a B, a C, an A. What are those other areas? Even kids with A's have other areas in which they could be working to be more thoughtful. But I don't see a space where we can provide finite scores or grading on those various components of the portrait of the graduate. So I will yield my time, and we will come back to this, but right now, we are going to go to the definitions component. Definitions.
Can I say one more thing before we move on?
Okay,
I
so
just feel-
can we have 1 minute, 60 seconds for the
Okay.
one more thing?
I just-
We're going to come back
I just-
to it, though.
Okay, well, but again, I think, I'm just gonna ask staff, okay? Are you in agreement that we cannot grade transitions? And the statement around transitions needs to come out? And secondly, do you agree that we can't, the skill development could be something that's not graded, so it can't be under communication of grading. It could be something that's, provided a different way, but we can't put social emotional learning in here. We do a cell screener already, and parents are getting feedback on that, on their social emotional learning. So I just want staff to respond to transitions and social emotional learning being part of any grading.
Yeah, I would agree with you on the social emotional learning. I don't think that for many of the same reasons we discussed with Portrait of a Graduate, I don't think it would really be prudent to include that as part of the report card. I do think our screener is providing that information back to families. Where exactly is the transition section that you're referencing, though? I apologize, I'm not seeing that.
It's written under achievement-based grading. It's right there. So you right.
Second
Stop.
bullet.
No. Under. It's in there. Responsive to student learning needs. Where's that? Yep, it's down here at the bottom where she's highlighting it.
Okay. Well, that's a big paragraph. Let me take a look at it.
That is a big paragraph.
Starts down here. And make adjustments for transitional periods in students' lives, including, whatever.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't know exactly how to interpret that right now. I'd have to think about that more, what the intent is with that.
I
Thank
do
you.
think we need to come back to this component to kind of be more reflective of the conversation in the room and the feedback that we've received from staff. I don't think we're going to be able to be productive right now as it stands. We'll take one last 60-second comment from Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, and then we're going to move on to definitions. And this will be one of the pieces that we wrestle with a little bit later, because I do share some of the things you have just mentioned, Ms. Lady. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
Thank you, and I agree, and I think when we did the boundary policy, there were certain questions that we just left open for the full board, and this may be one of them, and I'm not saying we're there yet, but this may be one section. I did want to say a couple things, just, I'm lifting up my experience and the experience I've heard from many families. I would be really careful in talking about some of these portrait graduate skills that are embedded in some of these lessons, unless you're really sure they're happening at all levels of classes, because I can tell you they're not. And you know, what's happening in AP and IB classes, and I've had an AP and IB student, and I've had a self-contained student, and what they received in terms of education that developed those skills was vastly different. And the amount of remediation we have to do in college is vast. And that's why I wanted it in here, because until you're consistently ensuring that all assignments are actually embedding these skills and building the independence and resilience to use these skills, I think we need to name them or get rid of them. Because right now, it's an inequity in terms of what we're doing to develop those skills in some students and not others. And that's why I feel it's really important. And if it's not an assessment, it's got to be somewhere. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to take a deep breath and move on from philosophy, knowing that this is another component for us to get back to. I am hoping that by the time we get back to this, maybe it's not even today, because I see that it's already 4:12, that staff can have a chance to wrestle with this and to provide some feedback based on what is here. And we too, as a committee, can do the same thing. And Robin, you'll be taking this over back on the 15th. Definitions. There are several that are embedded here, provided by a number of board members. One of the things that I want to be clear that hopefully we can accomplish, and please excuse the format, I was doing this very quickly this afternoon. We have several terms here. Are there any terms here that we feel should not be here? Not what they mean, but just should not be here. And staff, I also would like feedback from you. Ms. Lady?
I'm okay, sorry, that was left out
Okay,
before.
thank you. I don't think I see any feedback in terms of what should not be here. So another easy question. Are there any, we're trying to be successful here. Are there any terms that we believe are missing that should be here? And again, we might walk away from this conversation, and tomorrow we'll come up with 2 more things. But if anything comes to mind right
Can you
now.
scroll down so we can see them all?
Ms. Brown, will you scroll down, please? We have assessment, formative assessment, summative assessment, reassessment, grading, gradebook type, gradebook weighting, and secondary student. What do we believe is missing?
This isn't a big deal thing, but if we're going to talk about grading scale and pass-fail, we should define those as well.
Oh,
And
that is a
homework.
good thing.
And homework, I mean, I think the homework definition is embedded in that statement, but I think to be consistent with definitions, every term we talk about should also be defined in the definitions.
Thank you.
So I would say it's grading scale, pass-fail, homework, grade reporting, informal versus formal, and academic honesty should be in the definition section.
Okay. Ms. Lady, is that your hand? I can't tell. Is that your window? Nope, that is your window. Now, okay. Go ahead.
My hand's not up. I'm fine. I can't tell. Mine says raise hand, which means I hit it, then I raise my hand. So I think my hand is lower.
Okay, it's okay. All right, now that we have come to consensus about what is here, let's try to dig into the content of those things. And folks, I think it's very important to know that a definition should not be providing our position on an issue. It is just describing what exists. This will primarily, our audience for this will primarily be our parents, will primarily be our students and our caregivers. We just want to explain what the term means and to make sure that there's context that is provided. It should not provide our position and what we think it should look like or not look like. It is just a definition. And granted, they're not necessarily the definitions that are being pulled out of Webster's. They are more academic definitions in the educational setting in terms of how they're utilized. So let's start with assessment. Please review the term assessment and share any feedback here. We're just going to try to do one at a time.
So can
But
I
I-
ask a question? Did
Yes,
you
ma'am.
distribute this in hard copy?
No, I just shared it, but would you like for me to email it to you?
Well, otherwise, I'm subject to where it is on the screen, and
I shared it
You know.
with you, so it should be in your shared with me drive. So I didn't
Oh,
give a
I'm sorry.
hard copy, but it was,
never. Yeah, I never saw an email around it. Therefore, I didn't know it was in a shared drive.
you broke up. Please say that again.
That I did not look in a shared drive because I don't recall an email making me aware that something was in a drive.
You
So
should
I can
have,
look there now.
yes, please look, because when I share, I say also send message, so you should have gotten a
any-
message
Yeah. When did you share it?
just when we got into this room.
Okay, yeah, so we didn't get ahead of time. Okay, thank you.
No. So let's just talk about assessment. Okay, we'll do 2 minutes because I know assessment is a little bit larger, but let's just try to keep it as much as possible to that one term. And if you feel that there's things that belong elsewhere, please say so. Ms. Brown, 2 minutes, and our first speaker, Ms. Marin, you were first.
Yeah, for assessment, and I will have to try and connect this with some things, Dr. Anderson, I'm sorry, but, you know, I feel like this has to be really particular, again, with the vernacular. Like, it's got to be totally accurate, and already what I've seen in the draft we have a lot of interchangeability of assessment and grading, and that is like no good. I also think, you know, we could have a formative and summative subpoints of assessment. There was also a point that I wanted to make that I pulled from another school division's grading or, you know, policy, and it was about use of grades. You know, I don't know that I want to spend my time going through each definition. I would rather highlight what I think is important, because until we appropriately place the words in the right places, I'd rather spend the time doing that and then also talking about the other things. So, you know, yeah. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
We'll come back to you, because this is a big one. Ms. Heismer-Heiser?
So when I kind of looked at this, I tried to take out things that were not definitions, right? Because I think those belong in different sections when we're talking about our sort of philosophy around reassessments or summative assessments. I feel a little bit like some of these definitions are too long. So, for example, formative, and I didn't take this out because I didn't want to just take everything out, but like, for example, under formative assessment, when we start saying examples include, assessments typically do not carry as much weight, to me, saying assessments do not typically carry as much weight is more of a philosophy than it is a definition, right? I think we need to just, for formative assessments, I would just stop at they are intended to provide feedback to student and inform instruction, period. Because the rest of it, to me, I think examples are too operational. I think that's up to the teachers and collaborative teams and staff to figure out what examples of formative assessments are. And I think the fact that they don't carry as much weight is a statement of philosophy. So I would first recommend that we end formative assessment definition after that second sentence, before examples include. That's my 2 cents on that one.
Put on my glasses. Seeing no other speakers, I will take my turn.
Are we going to vote on that, or just?
No,
wait till
I'm just
he-
going to take my turn. I still get a turn. Yes, I want turns. I agree with both of the statements that were made. I almost took the liberty when I was putting this together to put formative and summative as sub-bullets, but I didn't want to do that in order to make sure we had this discussion, so I'm glad. I do fully agree with that. And I agree with what you've just shared as well, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. I think these definitions can be a little bit more succinct and just really just speak to the core of what the terms mean without the examples or any other language that hints to position. Because that can live under, I think, the section that was labeled requirements for assessment and grading practices, which is where I think I started moving some of them, but then I stopped because that's not my place to do as a single board member. So having said that, I don't see any other hands. Let's go back a second round for you to give any more comments if you would like around this section. See that. Ms. Dixon, please go ahead.
So I know its definitions and assessment. It does talk about a lot of degrees of mastery in contents competencies, but in the parentheses it says critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creating, and contributing. Should we remove that out because those are not measurable skills as we discussed earlier?
I agree.
And this is, again, another point is I wanted to see if we can also add self-assessment as a definition and maybe discuss that if students in secondary schools have an opportunity to do that, just like we do at work and other careers.
Would you mind, Ms. Dixon, if I ask staff to speak to that? What are the opportunities for self-assessment that students have that would support its own bullet?
Well, I think it's an excellent question. We're pretty big fans of self-assessment and students reflecting on their learning outcomes. Again, those are recommended practices that we would like to see happening in classrooms. I don't know that they lend themselves to the final grade that a student receives in a course, however. So those would be more like recommended best practices that we would want to see in the teaching and learning cycle as opposed to grading and assessment typically.
So you would not recommend it in the grading policy, per se?
I wouldn't, but I mean, again, I don't know if Colleen or Michael have a different thought or opinion on that.
I think if the policy later is going to utilize the term self-assessment and some way we're going to integrate that into grading policy, then it should be in the definitions section. But right now, I don't think we include self-assessment in our grading and reporting practices.
Thank you. Ms. Dixit?
Yeah, and I want to tell you where I'm coming from. So during one of the summer camps, I should say that my son took a self-assessment, and then the teacher or the person he was working with worked with him and said, and they shared that with us, and they said, he doesn't think himself and that he's really good at this, but he is. And so just kind of build the confidence. It's sometimes important because some students are very critical of themselves. Some are too overconfident and some are just right in different skill sets. And it sometimes gives them that extra, encouragement that, no, you're good at this. You are overthinking this or whatever, right? So it's not a very subjective, it's not obviously for math and science and all those, those grades. It's more of their assessment of themselves as a person, how they're learning, how they're behaving, how they're working with the team. So those were the things I think I was kind of referring to.
Thank you. Did you have anything else? I think you have more time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Oh, that was actually perfect. Checking to see if Miss Lady's hand is up. It is not. I will.
My hand should be up if you can't see
Oh,
it,
for
sorry.
Christ's sakes. I'm calling on you when it's not up, and I'm not calling on you when it is up. Please go ahead, Miss Lady.
All right, so under assessment, I completely agree. We need to take out what's in parentheses. I don't actually think that if we really Googled assessment that those words would come up at all. I think those were inserted, and I understand it because they're POG. The other thing I want to say is I'm going to go back to the cell screener. I know for a fact that there's something related to kids' belief in themselves around how good they are at things. That's part of that assessment. And when teachers get that report, because I recollect being at Chantilly the first time we did a cell screener and having faculty comment on how they were surprised to see that some of their strongest students didn't feel like they were the strong student that they are. So I think that again, I don't know if you all are familiar enough with the cell screener and what those reports look like, but I think that I agree self-assessment should not be in here, but I do think that we are addressing these types of things with our investment in the cell screener. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we have some go-backs, because I think everybody's had a turn so far. I know we have some go-backs, but before we get to those, I just want to see if we could have consensus for, one, for us to add formative and summative assessments as subsections of assessment. Are there any objections? Just kind of be just under it. The formatting will come, but it won't be its own individual bullet as it shows. No, just moving it over. Secondly, because this is substantive, I do want to make sure we have consensus to remove the examples under both formative and summative. Are there any objections to that?
I think we need to get to the go-backs before we start making consensus. I mean, I have some questions and thoughts on that. I had my hand up.
It was actually your idea to remove it.
No, it was not. It was Ms. Dixit's idea.
The quizzes, not the collaborative. I didn't get to the critical thinking in that.
Oh,
Just
that's-
under formative assessment, the
I
examples.
thought you were talking about the reassessment.
No, I'm under formative assessments. I'm with the examples
Oh,
to
my
include
apologies. I thought you
quizzes.
were talking about I was talking about the other one. No, that's fine.
Okay. Are there any objections to removing under formative assessment, starting with examples? Because that really speaks to things that may live elsewhere and are not as germane to just a very strong and tight definition.
I don't object, but I will tell you that I believe part of the reason we're putting definitions in here, the kids know what these definitions are. It's the parents and guardians and caregivers that don't. And so without an example, I'm fine to take them out, but without an example, I don't know that they will fully comprehend what's written above it.
So
I think that's fair.
can I make a suggestion then?
Yeah.
I think instead of removing it, maybe we bracket it to say this might need to be moved to the more substantive section rather than here. I mean, the examples don't bother me as much as the next sentence is the assessments do not carry as much weight, because I think that is a
I agree
statement of
with you there.
philosophy.
That should be removed.
So we could say includes, items such as or whatever, includes but is not limited to, something like that would be fine if we want to make it clear. If that's a better compromise, maybe we could say examples include but are not limited to quizzes, class discussions.
So let me just restate what I'm asking for consensus on. We will leave the examples, but remove the next sentence that speaks about weighting a little bit more, or, yes.
Can we add the language but not limited to? Examples
Sure.
include but are not limited to? Then I'd be
So are there any objections to the removal of the final sentence under formative assessment? Okay, seeing none, we will move that, and I heard what you're saying. Okay, now the next thing that was brought up is
Are we
to,
adding that language or not? I just want to make sure I have consensus.
yes, I
on
wrote it.
Well, do we have consensus on it?
Oh, I don't think we need consensus on not limited to.
I don't know. I was
That's-
just asking. I want to make sure people don't say
It's
later
not
on
that
we don't.
substantive, so I was just going to go ahead and add it.
Okay.
I'm going to take that liberty. Now, the next thing that was raised in these is the removal of critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. I understand you want to make some statements, and then we'll take consensus. Let's go ahead for 1 minute for Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
But did you want to look at summative? There was a sentence suggested to remove under summative too, before we get to that point, if you want to go step by step.
I would imagine the same thing we did for formative would work under
So remove the-
summative.
so remove
We
the
will
last
leave the
sentence?
examples and lose the last sentence, because they're kind of
Just wanna make
mirror
sure-
images of each other.
Are we okay with that? Just want to make sure people are okay with that.
It's my assumption if we were okay with formative, we would be okay with
I know,
summative.
but
That's why I didn't
sometimes,
ask. Do you want to speak to the three components?
I'd like to make sure we have consensus on that, because sometimes when we don't take that vote, people then later on say.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, I believe we have consensus on removing the final sentence under summative and keeping the examples. Are there any objections? There aren't any. Would you please take your turn regarding the three comments about under assessment? Not the three comments, the comments in parentheses.
Ms. Dixon had her hand up.
Ms. Dixit? Do you have an objection to removing it under summative?
No, I was not, I was just voting for the other one. I thought we can just raise our hands or because,
You're right.
just to show this.
It's just that Ms. Sizemore-Heiser had some comments that she wanted to make regarding the phrases that are in parentheses underneath assessment. I wanted to give her the opportunity to speak before we took consensus.
Yeah, I didn't have that assessment. Was that something that you had added, Dr. Anderson? Because I didn't have that on the document that I got earlier. So this is the first time I'm seeing that language under
It
assessment.
wasn't one of them. Someone had written it.
So, I mean, I'm okay with removing what's in parentheses, but I think we need to leave measured degree of content or competencies or skill acquisition, which mirrors what we have in the purpose.
Right. And I don't think that was under debate.
Well, that language, let me finish my turn, please, if you don't mind. That language isn't in here. So right now, it's just mastery of content or competencies. What I am suggesting is we also mirror the language up in the philosophy, which has skill proficiency in there. So what I'm suggesting is if we want to take out the specific language regarding collaboration, et cetera, that's fine. I understand the point you're making, but I think it's mastery of content or competencies or skill proficiency. Or mastery of content or competencies or skills, and then we take out what's in parentheses, because then it matches what's in the philosophy.
Okay, so let's go ahead and that was under purpose or philosophy?
It was originally under, somewhere in the top, I can find it exactly, it's under the philosophy.
Okay, the philosophy is still a work in progress, so.
Then I
if-
think we need to leave the definitions until we finish the philosophy then.
Well, the
because-
definition was not going to be removed. The only thing that was under discussion is what Ms. Dixit had suggested, which was which was also shared by a few others, that I do think we would have consent, we will have the majority of removing just what is in the parentheses.
And that's fine, I'm suggesting we add to mirror what's in the philosophy, even if we can always remove it, but it's hard to do definitions while other areas are still under flux, because the definitions come from the other areas that are under flux, and so I think it's difficult to do that. At least for right now, I would suggest leaving it there, and then when we finish the other sections, we can go back and make sure that the definitions, all of them are in alignment with what we did. So I would suggest leaving content, competencies, or skills, and then taking out what's in those parentheses. And then we can go back and, after we finish the philosophy, I mean, we had to do that with the other policy, to go back and make sure they were in alignment with each other once you finish. So I think that would make sense to me.
Okay, I think we're saying the very same thing. The only thing that I am asking for consensus to remove, it's what's in parentheses. That has been it for the past 5 minutes.
My hand's up.
Ms. Marin and then Ms. Lady.
I think we're in the weeds. I think we've entered the weeds, and we didn't want to go here for a reason. Just as philosophy is not yet fully baked, I think we're running into these philosophical questions. I really want us to be productive in the last 25 minutes that we have here. You know, we had talked about these other requirements and the grading scale. You know, there's some low-hanging fruit that it would be nice if we could put a pin in. Do we want to include the grading scale or not? Do we want to include pass-fail? The homework section mentions elementary. I mean, there's just, I want to remind myself that this is supposed to be the guidance to the superintendent, and we are getting very nitty-gritty. So I think if we can get the philosophy hammered out, that the definitions will come from that. I see us circling the drain here and not moving forward, and I'd really like to know what's going to move us forward here. We've had like 3 or 4 rounds of go-backs on this.
Ms. Lady, and then we'll try to move on.
Yeah, I agree with Ms. Marin. I think that we're circling about things that are hard to assess. and they're in philosophy, and now they're in assessment. So, I'm going to lean on staff. I think staff, I'm going to ask you to be bold and direct when we revisit this around what should be in a policy and what should not be in a policy when it comes to some of these different variables. But I'm with Ms. Mayor, and I'm ready to move on to some things that we can probably hopefully agree upon and put a pin in.
Okay, but I'm going to give this one last try because from the conversation that I'm hearing, I think we are there. What is on the table right now? Raise your hand if you are comfortable with removing the following: critical thinking, communication, collaboration, in creating and contributing. What's in the parentheses? If you are comfortable with removing that, raise your hand. Okay, we have majority. Thank you. That part is removed. Okay, moving on to the remainder of the definitions. I don't think we have any additional comments. If you do, please include them in this next round. What I also heard is for us to add definitions for pass-fail, definition for homework, definitions for informal and formal, grading. So I'm going to allow about 90 seconds for us to give feedback to the addition of those 4 different components. Yay or nay to each of these 4. Ms. Dixit, why don't you lead it off? It's nothing on the screen, it's what people said. I just captured what people said when they were giving their comments. I will repeat. For us to add definitions for pass-fail, definition for homework, definitions for informal and formal, was it grading? Or reporting? It's whatever, reporting, whatever. Yes, informal and formal reporting. Right. And academic honesty. So there are 5 pieces. Are we in agreement to adding these 5 pieces? Do we think they live here as definitions? Ms. Dixit? Your mic is not on. I don't know if you're speaking.
I'm just reading it down.
Okay.
I had just I have to read it again, so I'll come back to it.
Thank you. Miss Lady, are you okay
Yes,
with
so-
adding those 5 things?
No, I think the definitions piece, my understanding of the definition section was to try and provide, again, we're talking about parents, caregivers, and guardians, how to understand the policy. When you talk about homework, it's defined in the homework section, which is moving that regulation into this policy. When you talk about informal and formal reporting, it's defined under how we're going to do grade reporting, and I don't want to be redundant about that. And then when you talk about academic honesty, again, we've added it as a section and it's fine there. So I don't think that any of those need to be moved into the definition section, because again, I see the definition section as helping the person who's reading this with terms they may not be familiar with and aren't explicitly defined under a section where it's addressed.
Thank you, Miss Lady. Miss Marin?
Yeah, I agree. I think the definitions are meant to be things that are used more than once throughout the policy, and that might be complicated concepts. The pass-fail can be defined in its own, homework as well. And again, I think reporting needs to I think reporting should not be mentioned until that section. I think that's the cleanest way to talk about it. I also think that there could be in the grade reporting this use of grades idea, which, again, I pulled from, I think it was Norfolk City Schools, and it says things like provide a record of student achievement, derive student GPA. We haven't talked at all about GPA. That could be a definition. Provide information for entrance into programs, provide criteria for honor roll selection. I mean, I just would like to be more robust in this. And the other thing, too, that I want to figure out somewhere, again, in this thing of consistency, is our schools implementing the current stuff consistently, which is what was mentioned was a problem. So again, we're way down here, and we talked about wanting this to be consistent, and the conversation is still very much about way detailed, and like, how are we going to make sure the superintendent is designing something that's consistent? And I don't feel like this conversation is at that range right now.
Thank you. I will take a quick turn. I also agree with Ms. Lady's comments regarding the definitions that were just presented, so I'm fine with not adding them. And I think the next piece, and I'm going to skip over the responsibilities piece to start to talk about the requirements for assessment and grading practices next. But before we go there, I would like to take consensus of the group to not add the terms that I shared before. If you do not want to add them, please raise your hand at this time. We have 1, 2, 3, which is majority of this group. Okay. Please bring your attention to Section 5, Requirements for Assessments and Grading. This is where I think most of the direction to the superintendent from the board live. This is where we talked a little bit more about our consistencies. Again, this is just a way of, I've just collated all of the documents that were circulating earlier, just to give us something to respond to. So please take a look at it. There's no page numbers here yet, but we will open up the floor for 2 minutes, and then we will talk about next steps. Miss Lady.
Sorry, this left from before.
Oh.
I'm not ready to speak yet.
Okay, that's fine. This area, just for everybody's edification, who may not have it to look at, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections that speak to what would be the school board's expectations regarding gradebook type, gradebook weighting, number of assignments, reassessments, and lowest grade assignments.
Can we slow down a little bit, because this document was just emailed to us today, and
I
we're going
just
really
read the
fast.
titles. I just read the titles. For people who are not here, you have it in front of you, so you could read it at your pace. People who are here who do not have this document, I'm just saying what the 5 components are.
I'm just asking for a minute to read it.
Absolutely, you have all of the minutes to read it. I just wanted to share with people who do not have this in front of them, the content of this section. It is meant, as was provided by people in this room, to convey our expectations around 5 components. What I'd like for us to be thinking about as a group, once you're finished reading, again, take all the time that you need, is, are these the things we want to communicate? Are these high level? Are these too specific? Are these too in the weeds? We need to respond to what is here. There's 5 sections. Ms. Marin.
I do think we need to include these, even if we don't have the complete idea of how, whether it should be the 70-30 for weighting, or the number of assignments, or exactly what the reassessment is. This is what our students are asking us for. They want to know, what's the reassessment policy, and is it going to be fair, and is it going to be equitable and consistent? I think we get to the consistency we all want by including these 5 things, even if all we say is the superintendent has to make a decision on these 5 things and be consistent about it. The one place that I think we could have further, well, maybe not one, but one place we could have further conversation is that gradebook type. And I tried to capture the conversation we had, which was, is it across core disciplines? Is it, then what about world language or the arts? Is it within a school only? Is it across all schools? We could bypass that in some ways by making the policy general, or we could tackle that. But overall, I do think we need to have the thing about the gradebook type. I also think the title of this section needs to change. I might have drafted that title, I don't know, but let's take out assessment again, because we're talking about grading, or I don't know, we got to address that. I also do think that something should be in here about the technology platform need to be kept current. So whether that's, it's incorporated into the chief technology officer's plan, or the CAO's plan, or, the appropriate contracting needs. I just don't want us to have old grading platforms, and we've seen some of our internal systems be too dated, and that's going to really mess this up, especially when we want it to be accessible for families. So I am okay with, it was for all 5 topics you were asking, Dr.
There are 5
Anderson?
bullets, yes.
5, okay. I also, I have other notes, but like AP and IB, that could be spoken to, CTE. I mean, again, this is how broad or not do we want to get, but for me, I'm looking for how we can be consistent. we've got to put the consistent, I don't see that word consistent in there enough, so, okay, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Ms. Dixit?
I just feel we're just going too fast today, and I'm not getting, the document wasn't shared earlier. We had something else from Wendy, which we're not even sharing in the meeting, which she put together. So unless you don't want anybody else's opinion, then just go ahead and do your thing. I'm not able to really participate at this time.
Okay, thank you. I just want to clarify something. What is on this document is exactly what was in the document that was distributed by members of this board earlier. All I did was bring it over without the red line. That is it. So this was brought by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, who added to what Ms. Marin had added, had started, and what Ms. Lady had made some comments to. That is it, especially this section. This section is exactly as it was provided to us by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, who I believe was the last one to make comments. So it's not any newer than what she provided at that time. It's this
So
one.
just real quick, the only thing I want to add to that was the idea was that we do some crosswalking on the different ways that we saw the language. So I see that, and I understand how you took it, Dr. Anderson, but I am struggling myself. I do have the other document open at this point, but I'm trying to track what's different from Ms. Marin's to mine, to Ms. Sizemore-Heiser's, and then to yours. And that would be an additional column Wendy would have done if she had yours earlier. So, I certainly want to keep moving forward, but I do understand some of what Ms. Dixit is trying to express. But meanwhile, let's go ahead and continue this conversation about assessment and grading practices.
Thank you. Would you like to take a turn to that?
I'm still trying to read through what's in front of me. Thanks.
Okay. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
I would make a suggestion that since a lot of this is new and we have these crosswalks and people are struggling, that we just have the conversation today. We have the 15th to take consensus on these pieces, but I think that might make some people feel a little more comfortable if we kind of get some ideas of where we're at and then come back on the 15th and really, then we'll all have time to digest it and then come, I think, with thoughts ready for consensus. I appreciate trying to get us to agreement, but I think there's some things that are maybe going a little fast with the documentation. I think everyone did a really great job of bringing their ideas and their sort of, and then I think, Wendy, your chart is really helpful, but I think just having time for them to digest it is good. Having said that, on this piece here, I do think we need to have assessment in the title because we talk about reassessment as one of the features in this. One of the bullets is reassessment, and the grade weighting talks about formative versus summative assessments, and we have summative and formative assessments in the definition. So if we're going to talk about different types of assessments, I think this needs to be in the title, or maybe we just need to take out and we just say grade weighting, is there. I also think under the grade weighting that perhaps we take out the examples because the examples we left in the definitions. So I think it might be good just to leave the words formative assessment and summative assessments and leave the examples to be in the definitions. And I also would take out the such as 70-30 because I think that was rolled out, but I'm not sure I'd want to specify specific percentages in the policy, even though it's such as. I think we just leave it as specific percentages. So I think if we're going to have examples in the definitions, we don't put it here. I do think if we talk about assessments, we should have it in the title. And I do think we do need to have these at least at high-level guidance on these topics because these are things that have come up. So, and I think the way this written here in general has some good high-level guidance on the topics without crossing into specific operations. So I'm generally comfortable. I think we need to spend some time thinking through them.
Okay, Ms. Lady?
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with Ms. Sizemore-Heiser related to some of the things to be eliminated. And especially in the one, I got to go back to it on my sheet, but especially into the grade weighting section, I agree to be more consistent with what we put in definitions.
Okay, thank you. I will take my turn. I do appreciate, I'm not sure which one of you began this authorship of this section, probably Ms. Marin. I do think we need to provide some language here, because this has been the crux of what is going on in our division and the inconsistencies. One of the things that I particularly appreciate is the fact that we have highlighted the expectation that it be consistent across the division. I was initially a little concerned about the third bullet, which is the number of assignments, but kind of hearing the conversation here, I don't think I need to raise those hesitations. We do need to clean up some of the language a little bit, but I think offering our expectations will be important in this area. It is 4:50. I am not sure if we have time to do much else, unless people are just wanting to just offer general comments and last questions. And then we will clean up these notes and pass them back over to Miss Lady for the 15th. So general comments and questions that are still outstanding, Ms. Marin?
Yeah, I mean, this was an ambitious turnaround to do in a week, but this is the timeline that we have. You know, I put all my best thinking into a document I shared on Thursday last week, and I think that we need to be able to say, you know, what's your opinion on use of gradebook? What's your opinion, or this is what I think about reassessment? Otherwise, we need to then agree that we're not going to have an opinion other than it's got to be in the policy and it's got to be consistent, and that is okay. But I'm not willing to waste another 2 weeks because we've been talking about this. So I have big questions like, should we mention GPA? Are we going to include speaking to semester-long courses versus year-long courses? What about credit-bearing courses? Elementary grading? What about promotion? We say nothing about promotion, although originally I think the policy has it. What about retention? What about holding harmless when we switch this grading over and students don't get harmed because they've had one grading system and then another? What about a course syllabus? You know, I do feel like we've been hashing out these things, and we either need to agree that the policy is just not going to get done on time, and I don't want to agree to that, or we have to say it's got to be general because we don't have the time and expertise to make it specific enough. So I would really appreciate, I guess, Dr. Anderson, as you are leading this meeting, like, what are the next 2 meetings going to do, or Robin, or I guess Dr. Anderson or Ms. Lady, we've got 2 meetings left. I have a list of questions that I'm thinking the board it would be helpful for them to weigh in on, but if we can't figure it out, then the best we can do is just say, the superintendent has to do the following and make it happen. And I have to say, this is what happens when boards do not regularly update their policies. It becomes excruciating to do this. So I really hope in the future, the next board will do this in the 5-year timeline that we are committed to in our rules.
Miss Lady?
So so what I would like to do is, take this document and also the document that Wendy created, and I'd like to get that to staff today. And I honestly would like to ask staff to create a policy that they think includes the priorities I think collectively they've heard us, talk about, but also keeps what needs to be operational in operations. And we can hopefully get that to us fairly quickly. I do feel like we need to try and probably meet again before 2 weeks, or at least share documents that can be, and then ask for feedback. I don't believe that we can be wordsmithing this in a Google Doc because it needs to be a public meeting if we're all in there. So we can't do that. But I would like to ask staff, because I do think that we're waxing and waning philosophical a lot in these different categories. In relation to promotion and retention, that's currently a regulation. It's not in policy. Whether or not it should be added in some sort of brevity here, but still remain as it does in a more lengthy description under the regulation. I guess I would say to staff, you heard the other things that Ms. Marin referenced. Again, in trying to put, everything related to grading in one policy, instead of in 4 or 5, which is where it's been. I think that's something that makes sense. But that would be my next step. The only way I see to expedite this is that in some ways, as a board, we need to get out of our own way. And then we need to turn to the experts who I think have listened to several meetings around where people live and what's important to them. And then I think we need to be able to get that and have conversations with the rest of the board, share it with them, and get their input before we start to wordsmith it again. So that would be my suggestion. I'll offer up if anyone wants to comment on that before maybe perhaps asking for a vote to move in that direction.
Dr. Presidio, I don't know if you wanted to share anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're going to do whatever is helpful to the governance committee in getting the policy revised on time. Different policy revisions have taken different approaches, but what Ms. Lady suggested is something that, we have done in the past where the governance committee would give us direction about the types of revisions that they would like to see in the policy, and then we would provide draft language for the committee to then revise and refine to best meet the needs of the group. So we're happy to do that if the full committee would like us to do that. I certainly would be happy to give that a try before the next meeting.
Ms. Dixit and then Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Yes, I actually had a little bit of question about one of the definitions, or I should say grading. It's not on the screen right now, but so I'm going to look at my lowest grade assignment. Lowest grade may be assigned for any completed work is 50%. And I wanted to see if there is any other thoughts on that from the staff. There is any other way to address this, because I want the students to work hard. I want them to come prepared. And there's some special circumstances I can understand, but how often are we going to give them this leverage that they can, not do work and get 50%? So if somebody can explain that.
Well, I'll give it a shot briefly and then be happy to talk to you further offline if you would like. We've had this in our grading policy and practices for a number of years now. And the thinking is that a student who receives a 50 on an assignment on the 100-point scale, that's still an F. But if they receive a 0, mathematically, that really disadvantages the student's ability to recover from that 0. What we've done with the amended policy, and we did this as part of our grading committee work 2 years ago, is give the teacher the ability, if a student doesn't make a reasonable attempt on the assignment, to be able to assign a 0 if they feel like the student was just trying to take advantage of that policy. But I always want to be clear that the 50 is still an F. It's not like advantaging the student beyond what the lowest assigned grade in a course could be. And we felt like that was a pretty good balance to be able to still maintain a student's ability to pass a class, whereas if they received a 0, oftentimes on even one particular large assignment, it's almost mathematically impossible for them to be able to pass a class. So that was the thinking. The grading committee worked on that, revised it last year, so again, that if a teacher felt like a student was not being responsible and trying to complete the assignment appropriately, they could assign them a 0 again. On a summative assignment, the student would have another attempt to be able to raise that grade and make that assignment up.
Okay, may I ask, is it the same thing in colleges? I've not gone to college in the United States, so I wanted to ask all of you,
Well,
is this how it's done in colleges too?
Well, I mean, I think it depends. I mean, some people, I think, have experiences that is not the case. Others have experiences that is the case. Colleges, and we did a lot of research on this on the committee in the last 2 years, colleges typically don't have consistent grading policies across departments or across classes and professors. Grades are really in the purview of the individual professor, so I think it really depends. To be honest with you, I would say it's probably not the norm, however, for that to be the case. But, again, oftentimes we talk about in the workplace, if, you didn't complete an assignment on time, you're typically going to maybe be subject to reprimand or something, but you're going to be expected to complete the assignment and get that done.
I agree. Thank you.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Yeah, I just want to say, as someone who's taught at colleges for a long time, generally, there's no 50%, it's zero. But I'm, just to answer the question, but yeah, I know you've taught as well, but you're also right, there's no consistent necessarily grading policies. I actually just wanted to say something a little more positive, like, I actually think we're not in bad shape with this, honestly. Like, I think the reason we're not coming to consensus, or maybe getting some pushback and coming to consensus today, is just because we've all just kind of compiled this recently, I haven't really had time to sit with it and think through it, but honestly, I think a lot of the bones of what we've talked about and written in a way that's the more guiding principles on a lot of these topics than actually specifics. I think there's tweaks need to make, and maybe some things taken out or moved around. But I honestly, I'm feeling a lot of stress and angst about it. And I actually think this is in good shape. I think we need some time to look at that crosswalk and look at this latest draft and see if there's pieces from the crosswalk and the latest draft that we want to move or edit. And I think we can all do that ourselves and say, all right, here's pieces I want to add or I want to take out. And then I think it'll be not too hard in the next meeting to sort of walk through that, or maybe next two meetings, walk through that and decide. But honestly, guys, like, this has come such a long way, and whoever put this initial draft together, it's really good. And I think the work Ms. Marin, you and Ms. Lady did in compiling things, and then I thought it was really, really helpful and really well done, honestly. So I think that moved us, and I'm not just saying this, I think that moved us from the last meeting to this meeting significantly further. So I'm feeling really good about this, honestly.
Okay, I will take my turn before we adjourn. I do agree with much of what has been said regarding this conversation today, but one of the things that I also wanted to make sure, Dr. Presidio, if you could speak to the research regarding 50%, why that has been the recommendation of the committee.
Yeah, again, there is, particularly over the last probably decade or more, a lot of research that has suggested, again, as I was trying to mention, that on a 100-point scale, if you give a student a 0 versus a 50, which is still an F, it's a disproportionate amount of grade weighting that you are assigning when you do that. You're basically giving, 60% of the grade, which a student would have a very difficult time making up that mathematically over a grading period. So again, a 50 is an F. It's not saying that we're going to inflate a student's grade. You're still giving them an F. You're just not mathematically disadvantaging them from being able to recover in the course. And that's really the thought behind the 50%.
And one of the other things that I would invite us to think about, and I always do this, I do a little average on my own. If a child gets 75, 75, 75 on 3 assignments and a 0, that child will fail the class. Subsequently, if you have 75, 75, 75, and a 50, you will be in a much more in a position that more reflects your overall work rather than just one assignment. If a student chooses to do nothing, they'll just get a range of 50s and still fail the class. So there's really no advantage to those who are not working. What there is a little bit of a support for those who are, so that they are not in a hole that they cannot dig from, no matter how else they perform on other assignments. And I've appreciated the research. There's a huge body of research that is in support of that kind of approach. So I think I'm going to stop here. Ms. Lady, as per your comments, I think you have asked for us to have consensus regarding sending these documents to staff for them to take a stab at it. So I will forward this to Dr. Presidio. Well, you have it because you've been shared, this was shared with you. So consensus to send this to staff for them to come up with a draft for our review for next meeting,
Could it?
based on the conversations that we've had. Oh, Dr. Reed, I apologize.
No, I'll just, if I could make a comment. I've received, I think we've received, and I've received different copies of different drafts from different members of this team. So I need some clarification on which draft you want us to work from.
That's a good question. Ms. Lady?
So I'm not sure if you've seen it or not, the Excel spreadsheet Wendy created has Miss Marin, myself, and Miss Sizemore Heiser's language around different categories. Then we have what Dr. Anderson created in front of us. And my thinking was I was going to give you the Excel spreadsheet and this document and really truly tell you to, create a policy with the spirit of those different and the conversations that you've heard. Includes things that should be in policy. So I'm not directing you to go off of Miss Marin's draft or my draft. I'm going to share them all with you and hope that you can then create a draft to share with us. Is that fair?
Well, is the draft we're looking at, like, number one, I have not seen Wendy's spreadsheet, so I don't know what that is.
Well,
I know what,
yeah,
I know what this is that I'm looking at, but I don't know who's the author of this. I've seen a draft from Miss Marin. I've seen a draft from Miss Sizemore Heiser. So I apologize that I'm a little confused, but I just need the draft that you want me to look at or the collection of drafts you want me to look at, in one place.
From my perspective, it's a collection of drafts because, and that's all I can say. And I can talk to Dr. Presidio more individually as needed. But what you're looking at is Dr. Anderson's edit to 3 drafts that were shared with her.
Yeah.
Oh,
And so
okay.
she pulled parts of the 3 different drafts and then made some of her own edits. And then that's what we were looking at today. What Wendy did was with the drafts that she received by this morning from, and again, I believe that Miss Sizemore Heiser's came in this morning, but Miss Marin's was sent a couple Thursday, and I think mine was sent a couple days ago. She created an Excel spreadsheet so that you could see the different languages side by side. So you could have a better way of seeing maybe what was different. And so I'm going to share all of that with you. But basically what you're looking at is Dr. Anderson's enhancement interpretation of, but her edits that incorporate language from 3 other documents.
Thank you. And I'll need access to that then at some point.
Right. Yeah, I will make sure that these are, downloaded and shared.
You have it.
And so staff can hopefully move forward. And again, I mean, the main thing I want to, the only thing I just for full disclosure, my expectation is probably that what we're going to get from staff is a little bit more narrow than what some of the people on this board want. But I think that we have to be open to the fact of, these are the instructional experts. But having said that, I think that and I can maybe talk with you more offline about this, Dr. Presidio, but might be places where you could say that if the board felt insistent on going further in this particular area, like you did in a previous spreadsheet, here might be some additional language. But at face value, when you asked us to do the exercise, which I'm asking you to do now, we would not have included that extra language. But if you insist upon it, then this might be how we would word it. Does that make sense?
He said yes, it's a thumbs up.
Okay.
Dr. Reed, I did share this document with you and Dr. Edie and Dr. Presidio a little while ago. It's in a Google document, so just, it should have sent a message, but if you go into your shared with me, it should be there. It's supposed
So
to
it would have
generate.
been, I'm sorry, it's an email from you I didn't receive, so.
It's not an email from me, it's an email from Google that says something has been shared with
And
you.
I didn't get that email, so.
But if you go into your Google to shared with me, it should show up. So,
I don't think any of us got that.
So just as a point of clarification, it went to our FCPS schools email, not
Is that where they go?
fcps.edu.
oh,
So
That
where
doesn't,
it goes
I
to
can
die.
get everything to you. We'll figure it out. We got it.
But you were able to access it?
I have it, yes.
And Dr. Edie, you were able to access it? Okay, so I think it's 5:09. Oh, I think all of us had our last turns and we're after. I was just the last one to speak and then I turn it over to Robin for,
Well, I'm just going to take my turn because I have some concerns about this. What's going on?
I'm confused. Didn't speak? I apologize if you didn't speak. I thought we all had a turn.
No, I didn't speak to this last sort of plan forward on how we're doing this, the whole, are we sending it to staff?
Oh, we didn't even vote. You're right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, like, so we didn't speak to that. So is it, so what, my concern is that we've just spent 2+ hours editing and coming to some consensus on some of this document. Are we then just throwing all that out, or has that been captured in this, what we're sending to I want to make sure that what we're sending to staff as the place to start captures what we at least agreed to today. That's, and I think if we're going to do this, it would be helpful to have this document as is, and then maybe a fresh document started by staff and what their recommendations are using that chart, so we can kind of compare the two as well, rather than losing the work we've done today. But I guess I'm uncomfortable.
I agree. I agree with you.
Yeah, and I think, so I want to make sure whatever this document was that was just sent has captured whatever we agreed to today. And then that's the starting point for staff, but I think staff should create make a copy of this and then kind of create using that chart, and then we have both to compare. That's all I wanted to
Correct.
say.
I don't-
Just a point of
Yeah, I-
clarification, Miss Lady, I did capture many of the
Yeah, I'm
notes.
not-
I
I don't
can make
want
those,
Well, the reason I bring this up is because during this time when we've taken consensus, there's points where I've turned to to Janet and said, have you captured this, or I've heard you say that, but then I'm hearing there's notes here, and so I don't necessarily feel comfortable until maybe we see the version of this that's incorporating all the notes and consensus to say, let's send this to staff, because I don't know what exactly we're sending without seeing what that final version after this meeting is. Otherwise, why did we spend 2 hours discussing it today?
so I know
Right,
Miss,
so can I talk?
yeah, Miss Brown has her hand up. Hold on 1 second. I want to make sure that she adds this part just to help with your comments.
I can't hear her.
Sorry. Just to clarify for myself, sometimes when comments were asked to be, there was not consensus reached. It was until we change philosophy, we're going to go back. I have got them in my notes. I'm happy to go in and do them as suggestions about what people went for. The only thing I think I didn't capture was, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, where you wanted that language put in for that one section. So if you can come back.
I guess I don't know which language on which one section, so maybe I can talk to you later and see which one
Absolutely.
you're talking about.
Yeah,
because
it was the first thing that
just-
you, in the very first philosophy section where you wanted something about skills added in.
Yeah, I guess I'm just, either we do this as a committee or we don't, but I think it's probably a little bit too late to send this to staff to get their version now. It feels like.
I disagree. I will tell you, I think we are a rare school system when I've talked to other people where we don't start with asking staff to provide us with what they would say would be an ideal revision and then bat that around and edit it and add to it. We do it in reverse in Fairfax, and it doesn't always make sense to me.
We
So
don't do it. We typically get, I mean, when we did the boundary policy, we started with staff's revision and then added to as a committee. That's what our typical governance process has been, is we get the.
then I was misinformed, and that's on me. And so I'm going to back up the ship. And at this point, I'm going to ask for staff. But we're going to keep the integrity of what we've talked about intact. Staff is not going to edit this form. They're going to download it, and they're going to do it on their own. And if Janet can go in and add to this document, sort of edit it around suggestions. I don't know when you can complete that task, but I would say that would be fantastic. And then Janet, if we can also share the notes that you captured with staff, then I think that they can come up with something they can share. Doesn't mean we're certainly not going to adopt what staff comes up with. We're going to talk about it. But at least I think we can have I would like to get something like that from staff. And then for each of us to, go through and, take the time to.
Can I finish my turn? I don't disagree with what you're saying. All I'm saying is that I think before it's sent to staff, we need to see what the draft looks like with Dr. Anderson's notes and Ms. Brown's notes, so we all make sure that it's encompassing of our conversation. Then we can send it to staff to do what you're talking about. But until we see what this looks like, I want to make sure that there aren't pieces missing that then later on staff come back and we say, wait a second, we talked about this or that. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Miss Lady, I have a suggestion. If I can just please have a moment, because I did have the opportunity to do a few minor edits as we're talking, and one of them is essentially just reformatting where we put formative and summative assessment under assessment. I would like 2 days to meet with Ms. Brown for us to come together and have a document that is reflective, particularly the areas in which we had consensus in this conversation, and then we will send that to this committee prior to it being sent to staff. So we all are very clear on what is being communicated. 2 days.
Okay, so then, are you saying to me, because again, you're the experts in Robert's rules and school boards, not me. So are you saying we're going to vote on whether we all approve of that language to go to staff? And can we do that?
We cannot vote on the
Right.
language, but I want to make sure that nothing is miscaptured. Minimally, we could do that. We could have a conversation with each other to say, hey, this is not what was said, because I would not want us to send something to staff, because as it is right now, it is not entirely inclusive of the discussions that we had, because we did come to
Okay.
consensus on multiple components. So
We
I
did.
just want to have the time to do that, and then we could just be in conversation. You, as the chair of this committee, can talk with us, make sure we are all okay before you send it forward to Dr. Presidio.
Okay,
And-
well, if I can give you a deadline, then I would like that to be done, like you said, 2 days.
2
Can we-
days.
can we
Today's
commit to that?
Tuesday, Thursday, hard commitment.
Well, they're off Thursday. Staff is off Thursday.
I realize I'm not.
Okay. I mean, it would be nice to have something by close of business on Friday, that then we can share with staff so they can begin to work on it Monday.
Oh, if
'Cause
close of
I
Friday
want
is
it
fine
back.
too.
Yeah, I want it back from staff in time for us to look at it. And next week is a board meeting, and we're going to have plenty of other things to do reading on. And even today, even the assignments for today, they were, they were hard, and they came in at varying points where we weren't able to read everything before the meeting. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time to read whatever staff comes up with, put it up against what we will agree as the as inclusive of what we are had consensus on in the current working document, to inform our conversations on. I think it's not until the 17th, right?
15th.
Or the 15th? Yeah, the 15th.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Thank-
close
I
by
can
Friday is fine too. That's a little bit more time.
Well, I mean, the earlier the better, but I think out of fairness to staff, it's, Friday's probably fair
Okay.
to Ms. Brown. Thank you.
All right, so we will adjourn our meeting at 5:17. Thank you.